The next day, a smaller crowd was waiting by the gate and watched as Bob, Sally, and Samantha left to go collect apples. On the way, they told each other what they were going to do to get the apples. Bob was going to try the same thing as yesterday, except he would be running in a zigzag pattern. Sally was going to be burrowing underground using the least amount of energy required for tunneling while maximizing the space. She figured all this out using complex equations. Samantha showed them the item she had made. She made an apple magnet. The apple magnet would pick up the apples that were in a 5-foot radius. They would stay on until the power switch was turned off and gravity pulled the apples from the device. Once they reached the top of the hill, they nodded and began to put their plans into action. Noel was making lunch in his kitchen when he heard the noises outside. He smiled and walked towards the door. On his way to the door, he grabbed the butterfly net that was hanging on the wall. When he was outside, he immediately saw the blur that was Bob. You'd think he would have learned from yesterday, Noel thought. Noel stuck out his foot, and Bob fell flat on his face for the second day in a row. Noel smiled, picked up Bob, grabbed whatever apples Bob had acquired, turned towards the city, and kicked Bob back down the hill. One could almost see the look of disappointment on Bob's face as he went flying down the mountain. As Noel walked through his orchard, he felt movement under his feet. He looked behind him at a different tree and saw burrow holes near the base of the tree. Noel walked over to the tree and waited. He heard movement beneath him and placed his butterfly net over the hole that was beginning to form. Sally popped up from the ground and was caught in Noel's net. Noel brought the net closer to him and pulled Sally from the net's interior. Sally was too frightened that she left her apples in the net. A couple seconds later, Sally was flying through the air, heading towards the city. Noel looked to his right and saw Samantha with her back to him. Noel stuck up on her and grabbed her from behind. She dropped her magnet and struggled to get out of Noel's grasp. She too met the same fate as her fellow Trids and was booted towards the city. Noel smiled again and walked back into his house, finishing to eat his peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Bob, Sally, and Samantha were very disappointed. For the third time this year, none of them had managed to collect any apples for the town. They weren't looking forward to heading back into town after what had happened the day before. Nonetheless, they trudged back together. When they arrived at the town's gate, the band began to play celebration music again. Sally noticed that it wasn't the same gusto as yesterday, and the mayor quickly cut them off again. "What? No apples? Again?" he asked them. They nodded their heads, preparing for the worst. "Very well. I will give you one more chance. If you don't collect enough apples for the town tomorrow, I will have to do something drastic. I have never had to do this in my 35 years as mayor. None of my predecessors had to do it either. Please don't make me resort to it. Go home and get some rest. You have a long day ahead of you tomorrow," the mayor finished. Bob, Sally, and Samantha started walking towards their house and said goodbye to each other. They were all asking themselves the same question. What doesn't the mayor want to do? The next day, as Bob, Sally, and Samantha left the town, only a handful of Trids watched them go. On the way up, Sally and Samantha were looking at Bob with interest. It looked like he had gained 25 pounds since they last saw him. Bob explained that he had spent the whole afternoon and all of night lifting weights. He wasn't going to try and outrun the troll today, he was going to fight him. He planned to cause a distraction so Sally and Samantha could collect the apples safely and not have to worry about the troll. Sally then told Bob that she would be helping Samantha collect apples by using a mechanical arm. The mechanical arm would extend at the push of a button, reach up to 100 feet away, pluck an apple from the tree, and then bring it back to them. That way they could collect the apples without showing themselves to the troll. They all liked the others' ideas. Once they got up to the top of the hill, they got in place for their plans to work. Bob planted himself in front of the door to Noel's house and waited while Sally and Samantha began collecting apples using the mechanical arm. Noel was reading a book when he heard someone yelling at him from outside. They were calling him a coward for staying inside. Noel laced up his steel-toed boots and walked outside. He was surprised to see a Trid waiting for him. Bob challenged Noel to a fight. Noel accepted. They began circling each other, each waiting for the other to strike first. Bob finally caved. He charged at Noel. Bob swung his fist, intending to hit Noel's face. Noel swung up his arm to block it. Noel pushed Bob's arm out of the way and punched Bob in the chest. Bob flew backwards. Noel then charged towards Bob. He received a blow to the head that nearly knocked him unconscious. He staggered to the left. He stood up and faced Noel. He was charging again. Bob sidestepped and charged, and tripped Noel. Noel fell to the ground with a hard thud. Bob picked Noel up and threw him against the nearest tree. Noel smashed into the tree so hard that a bunch of apples fell loose from the tree and fell to the ground. Noel got up, shook himself. They began circling each other again. Bob charged again. As Bob was charging towards him, Noel sidestepped and let Bob run headfirst into the tree behind Noel. He began to feel a little dizzy. As he turned around to face Noel, Noel unleashed a powerful jab at Bob's chest. For the second time, Bob flew backwards. Both were panting hard. They were both getting beaten up. For the third time, they began to circle each other. This time, Noel began the attack by running towards Bob with his hands outstretched. As he reached Bob, Bob flung his arms out as well. Now Bob and Noel were wrestling with each other, trying to fling the other to the ground. Bob managed to throw Noel to the ground. As Bob was trying to keep him on the ground, however, Noel planted his feet on Bobby's chest and kicked. Bob flew off Noel and crashed into a tree. Bob fell down face first on the ground. Noel walked over to him. He was about to pick Bob up and kick him down the hill when suddenly Bob grabbed Noel's arm. He pulled hard and Noel went tumbling down to the ground on top of Bob. Bob quickly got up and kicked Noel in the side. He groaned in pain. Noel looked up at Bob. Bob was standing up and panting hard. Noel suddenly swept out his arm, tripping Bob. Bob fell to the ground. And while he was on the ground, Noel delivered a punch to Bob's head. He remained on the ground, unconscious. Noel stood up and picked Bob up. He cracked a smile. With an almighty swing of his foot, Noel kicked Bob down the hill towards the city of the Trids. He turned around. He could finally work at the problem at hand. He was trying to get rid of the other Trids taking his apples. As he was walking towards the tree, he saw a mechanical arm reaching out above him. He quickly jumped up and grabbed a hold of it. He yanked with all his might. He soon saw two Trids flying in the air towards him. He grabbed them both out of the air. He turned toward the city and kicked them both down the hill. Sally and Samantha got up after the painful goodbye. They knew they were dead. All the apples they had collected had been left at the top of the hill. They walked towards Bob. They each grabbed an arm and started to drag Bob back to the city with them. When they reached the city, only the mayor was waiting for them. "I see you didn't collect any apples again." "Very well. There will be a town meeting tomorrow afternoon. Be there." The mayor turned around and left them. Samantha and Sally sighed. They found a bucket of water and managed to revive Bob. They took him to the hospital and left for their homes. The next day, the mayor spoke to all the Trids. "We have tried and failed 4 times to get apples from the troll. Now is the time to think of a new strategy. It seems that us simply running up there is not enough. After all, he just kicks us back down the mountain. I suggest we go and meet the rabbi in the next city. Do you agree?" "Yes," cried the crowd. "It has been decided then. Tomorrow, I will go and meet with the rabbi and explain our predicament to him." The next day, Mayor Derriere was invited into the rabbi's house. The rabbi offered the mayor something to drink. The mayor accepted the cup of coffee the rabbi handed him. "What can I do for you?" asked the rabbi when he had taken his seat. "Well, I am in a small problem, Rabbi," began the mayor. "I have tried for 4 days to collect the apples that sit upon a hill. However, a troll owns the orchard and doesn't like it when we come and take his apples. In the past, I have tried reasoning with him, asking for the apples, but he refuses, then kicks me down the mountain. I was wondering, Rabbi, if you could go to the mountain and collect apples for us. We need the apples to survive. Without them, we will all die." The rabbi sat in silence for a while. Finally, the rabbi agreed to do it. "I will help you out, Mayor. Tomorrow I shall go up the hill and collect apples and place them into my basket. I will also try and reason with the troll and see if he will lend you his apples in the coming years." "Thank you, Rabbi," said the mayor. "Just make sure that you don't get kicked down the mountain." The next day, the rabbi walked up to the hill to collect the apples. As he was picking apples from the tree, he looked around, and the troll wasn't in sight. Finally, the rabbi saw Noel come out of his house look around. Confused, Noel turned around and went back inside. The rabbi just shrugged and went back to collecting the apples. A little while later, Noel came outside again. He looked around, and then went back inside. Still, the rabbi continued to collect apples. A third time, Noel came outside and looked around. As he turned to go back inside, the rabbi called out to him, "Hey! Don't you see me?" Noel looked around and looked at the rabbi. "Of course I see you, standing 15 feet in front of me, taking apples from the tree." "Does that bother you?" "Of course not. Why should I care if you're taking apples from my trees?" "Well, you seem to care if the Trids take apples from your trees." "That's just because they're Trids. It's part of their life, getting kicked down the hill by me." "Well, I'm taking apples from your tree. Are you going to kick me down your hill?" Noel laughed. "Silly, Rabbi. Kicks are for Trids."